Thank you.
Good morning. Many thanks to the moderator. Permit me to launch my talk with this formality, which I find to be not a formality at all. It is actually something of substance, giving thanks. We give thanks for two reasons. We understand that, all of us in this hall, regardless of our professional background or capacity, it is a part of our obligation to exchange views, ideas about how to become improved. It is dialogue that assists us in that, so that subsequently we can help as much as we can, wherever we can. So many thanks to Father Stavros Kofinas for many years of collaboration and for the good things that have turned up as a result, as he leads the way in organizing these important conferences. You know, it is very important that we should have an academic function arise out of the Church at such a level and so democratic in the liberty it vouchsafes. This is not at all a rule. The fact that he's been doing this for so many years helps it become the rule. Many thanks for that. I was very interested to follow the previous session, and it's a good example in practice of what I said. We heard substantial dilemmas being posited very courageously, as evident from the applause that brought the session to a close. It's important to care for human beings suffering pain, mentally, physically. However, it is our obligation to do that. Man is a biopsychological entity. You cannot split it into constituent parts, the bodily, the mental, the psychosocial. They all come together and are melded and merged. So, quite often when we seek to help the subject and focus on the subject, we focus on the soul, the spirit, the mental aspect, and we forget the physicality of the body and the social dimension, because there is no existence outside of the transaction with the other. At an institutional plane, whether we are scientific societies, or whether we're a church, or university, what have you, speaking institutionally, as we serve society, we need to have a very clear position and principle that helps resolve the antithesis that emerges in life, the conflict as a result of needs. That is where we come to grips with the politics in the sense of Aristotle. And it is one single position for one and all, in favor of love, against violence, against war, in favor of peace. This is the foundation. And that's where we can also give a certain perspective to what we do. One example, and I'll close with this brief section. It so happens that I have served institutions at an international, global level. During a time of conflict between Israeli and Palestinians, our psychiatric society sought to impel the International Psychiatric Society to bring to the table colleagues from either side and to produce a standpoint in our scientific community such that would not try to make excuses for one or the other side, but to make it possible for us from down below to establish a bridge for dialogue and do away with hatred and passion. That's what families do, you know, when they seek to overcome their differences. It's a social reality. I can operate the slides. Right, okay.
Ήταν κλειστό, έτσι, αυτό εδώ, ξέρω. Κάπου πρέπει όμως να βλέπει αυτό. Κάτι δεν κάνω καλά. Για δείξτε εδώ. Λοιπόν, καλά. Η πρώτη διαφάνεια είναι αυτό, το βιοψυχοκοινωνική πραγματικότητα.
Psychosocial reality of the family. Ergo my lengthy-ish introduction. Focus on our topic. I started out with the family. There's just a couple of things I want to say about the significance of the family, starting with the present moment. If you're not in the present moment, how can you think of the future? But the today, now, is not on its own. It gels in with the past and history. Nothing is in isolation. Now, given that the major issue has to do with our children and young people, youth, adolescents, Madame Soumaki will speak of difficulties in present-day adolescence due to these changes experienced. Now, well, the family has suffered several changes in our time. Nothing in common with my grandfather's family or my father's family. You know, by leaps and bounds, families have changed dramatically. Why dramatically? Society changes dramatically from one day to the next. How we live changes on every plane. There's never been such a fast pace of change. The BAM mode of vetting is a thing of the past. We find ourselves before the conclusion of the first quarter of our century, and enormous changes have happened, and that has, of course, changed how families constitute themselves. I believe, in my opinion, the family plays a very significant role and will be doing that in the future, not only in the past or in the present. Why? Because until now, in human history, the only way afforded to us to contribute with life, to create life, to support life, is the family. It is the prerequisite, the condition that gives the stability, the security upon which the child will emerge and learn and turn into an adult member of a society of adults. Experience and knowledge teach us how crucial the first formative years of life are for a child. That's where the foundations are laid. And that's where things can go amiss, and you might find yourself coping with children that are suffering significant difficulties. Now, historically, despite whatever form it might take, a family is about all of this written on the slide. It's part of the framework that seeks to assist children to grow and to turn them from dependents to adults. This is not to be taken for granted at birth. It has to be achieved.
Προσδιορίζεται κοινωνικοπολιτικά και αλλάζει. Στη δικιά μου εποχή. The authority of grown-ups is a thing of the past as we knew it, when before you were 18 there's nothing you could do on your own recognizance. This is not the case any longer. You can already take decisions, formative decisions at 13, 14, 15. I've got an example, I'll mention it later, that has to do with identity issues. So, family is the basic shape of things for a child to progress to the world of grown-ups. What you need, therefore, is stable and permanent and secure environment with distinct roles where a child can feel loved and accepted. Why do I say all this? Because factors such as an absence of parental models or codependencies or deficiencies can lead to family dysfunction. Family dysfunction is puts the future of a child in jeopardy. When families are absent, that's also a thing to worry about, in which case it is replaced or substituted. This is the rule, and you know there's a bias here. We physicians look at the pathology, and of course in my experience the institutions I've seen are unsuited to children. But when you have the substitution of a family by competent institutions such as fostering, adoption, some are better than others, some are not, but it's not the technicality that we should be looked at. Is it a foster child? Is it an adopted child? No, the question is how any kind of parent will approach the rearing of a child, the responsibility born in this respect. That's where you have serious sparking off of psychopathology. What are the changes that I spoke of that we are going through? We had nuclear family nowadays. The nuclear family had been surrounded in the past by the broader family with attributes that match the general definition I gave earlier. Their roles were steady, fixed. Parents fulfilled a parental role. The father was a wage earner. The mother cared for the children in the family environment. And there were institutions and roles that weren't necessarily good, but they were stable. The best example is the son with the patriarch, padre padrone kind of father, where you'd hope there'd be some sort of bond if all things went well, or where there would be fear ruling, difficulty in identifying. Now, things have changed. Things have changed because of how society has changed, not only in general terms, but also in special terms. Science has changed. What had been the general rule obtaining as to how children could come into the world doesn't hold any longer. There's so many ways to have children nowadays, going beyond the natural union of a father and a mother, producing children. Now we have several choices. On the other hand, modern family is one where the roles are changed. A mother works, is not solely concerned with bringing up the child. The father undertakes to care for the child, feed, nourish, change diapers, take the child to a children's party, do things that were purely in the woman's realm, the wife's realm, the mother's realm. And then there's other considerations as well, because things aren't quite so simple. The issue being this, and it's a very contemporary issue, children aren't born any longer between 20 and 30, parents' age. They are born from 30 to 40 on the whole, whether arising out of a natural union of a man and a woman or assisted by technical means. Now, I think this has some importance, in my opinion. And the other thing that has changed, and that is important, is that the children, on account of the difficulties found in the nuclear family, and that makes it possible to deposit them to social institutions, some of which are suitable, some of which are not. Often those aren't very good. An example, we had to set up children's care centers. The municipality just used ISO boxes. They've been brought there more than a year ago. Nesmirny people have not reacted. I was so struck by the paucity of a reaction. Why didn't parents say, look, why don't you do things properly? I mean, don't stop wasting money elsewhere. And the parents say, well, there's nothing I can do. I've got to go to work. I just need a place to deposit my child someplace, rather than an au pair of Finnish or Thai or Filipino descent. I have to take them to a daycare center. That means that the parent ceases being a parent. That means that the child becomes a miniature adult and is in our hands for us to drive him to English class and piano class and dance class and this and that and the other. And we find ourselves in a host of negative influences. These phenomena, even though leading to no pathology, turn human beings into something less than human, because for an identity to be constituted, you need differentiation. If things are undifferentiated, then things become very unclear, very vague. We'll hear Madame Soumaki speak of that. But it's not only all that I just ran through. It is that along with all that, and during the past few decades, we have seen it acknowledged that gender fluidity is a fact. Sexuality is fluid, all types of sexuality. It's not something to debate, it's something to be accepting of. So you find families consisting of a man plus a man, or a woman plus a woman, or a woman alone, or a man alone, and those families are of a newfangled type and will have to deal with them in the future. Recognizing this kind of sexuality spectrum is fully instituted, and this is the global trend wherever on the planet, in all forms it might take. And Greece has made some progress in this field of recognizing families of new type, and questions arise thereby because we lack the grounding on which to base ourselves. We know what was happening until yesterday, but on that basis you cannot respond to questions arising. Now, I see that I'm taking too much time. Well, then you better stop, says Father Stavros. Just a few words on uniparental families. We have found the divorce rate exploding. It's 1 in 4 marriages, not insignificant. And there's a number of people who opt for uniparental families, 15% throughout the EU. Some countries have more. Britain, for instance. So uniparental families, now it's a different thing when that arises from a divorce or a deceased parent. There's all sorts of acceptance afforded to that kind of uniparental family. It's a different kettle of fish if you have
η επιλογή που είναι πολύ σημαντική.
Single mothers, single fathers, or whatever. And there are so many men and women who prefer to be single parents. And it is not impossible to be that nowadays. And this beggars the question of how things stand. It's not what we knew from our history, and therefore for a child to constitute a personality, it needs both parents, as this triadic linkage. How does the child leave the mother behind? It progresses towards the father. Then you have identification procedures with one or the other parent, depending, and that will help becoming grown up. And that is a consideration for choosing to have a child. Not make a child, have a child on one's own. Adoption, in vitro fertilization are all modalities of choice. There are several surveys of the impact on children of that ilk. Just to say that there is a difficulty in being a father and a mother simultaneously. You can't be two things together. If you put your feet in two separate boats, you're bound to get ducked in the water. And it's not only about what happens in our family home, it's about society, what happens outside in society. And the question arises as to the conscious choice or unconscious choice made by someone opting to become a single parent. With an example, this lady who brings me her 16-year-old son, a very good student, very good sports person, but very violent against her and her sister who lives in the home. She wonders, why is this happening? The conclusion I reached: I have been a mother and a father to that child. Why is he beating me so? The answer I gave her was precisely for that reason. And her son said, she deprived me of a father like the other kids had at school. And we are talking here of an option being exercised, remember, not of some parent dying. Now, the other major portion of concern, same-sex parents. In our time, in our country, and globally, this is a huge issue. These things are a reality, not on the margins, not on the sidelines. It's a significant portion of our fellow humans who choose to be same-sex couples and become same-sex parents. So we cannot inveigh against them. We cannot moralize against them that show a degree of bigotry on our part, or at least of a certain inability in our psyche to contain the other, what is different and alien to us, and to see eye to eye with it. Suffice it to say that over half EU countries fully accept the rights of same-sex parents to become parents, to adopt, to become foster parents, to do whatever. There's 14 countries out of the 28, and 27 of the 28 countries at least admit part of the spectrum of those rights. But one question arises, and we need to look at that. How do same-sex families acquire children, have children, in a manner that is very different to traditional ways? The latter goes back centuries, millennia. The former is a very newfangled thing, counting less than 100 years. And what is involved is not only the upset of the model of the past, but the generation of a new datum on which we know practically nothing. Questions do arise, though, not on acceptance or rejection. No, what we're driving at is different. We who want to care for our fellow humans don't seek to be judgmental. We seek to make it possible for them to have judgment themselves, to have the discernment and critical functionality that is necessary. So what do same-sex couples do? In practice, several same-sex couples are such where one of the parents has children from a previous relationship. What does that mean? It means that, as in any other family where there is a divorce, they have to carry some baggage. And you could also have adoption, same-sex couples being allowed to adopt. And then there are various techniques. Sperm donors, surrogate mothers. Now, surrogacy poses several major issues, psychological, substantive. It's what I will conclude with.
Αντιλαμβάνεστε ότι
this affair poses questions, raises issues. Whose is the child? What it boils down to. What is the role fulfilled by either parent? What sort of upbringing do you have in same-sex couples of women and of men? What relations emerge, are formed with the children? Major issue. Several studies and surveys. There are trends. One of those trends is that there are differences between all male couples and all female couples. Looks self-evident. That's not the point really. No, there are two positions. One says it's not a question of whether they are same-sex or not, whether there is acceptance and day-to-day care and normal family life that gives normalized environment, and this will have no effect on sexual orientation. And then again, the other viewpoint arises from survey studies conducted by institutes and institutions that seek to prove a point. And clinical experience demonstrates that as regards the cognitive development may have issues with the constitution, and that might not be readily apparent at the start, but time will tell.
So we see that there are divergent views, ergo my question marks and my bangers. Let me conclude with surrogacy, another important change. Surrogate mothers, by definition, raise a degree of confusion as to the parental identity in several ways. The biological mother who contributes the ovum, the father, biological father who contributes the sperm. There is the person who seeks to be given the child to raise, biologically perhaps related or no. Traditional surrogate mothers, the woman who contributes ovum and womb, the surrogate mother who will only gestate, whose womb will be used. There is in vitro fertilization and then gestation. A host of problems arise. Those mothers are discouraged from pursuing a relation. You need to bring this to a close somehow. The issues raised lead to one question: whose is the child? There is confusion in the identities, such great problems, such a big range of problems. The impact on psychopathology, just think of it. Thank you very much.
Good morning, and thank you for this honorary invitation to be with you in this conference. Indeed, I believe that cooperation between institutions are necessary. In the last couple of years I have been working in the island of Crete. I have felt this even more so because we do not only have the great urban centers in Greece, we have many villages where people are left, they are abandoned. And I found out that cooperation among the priests of all these regions, and actually I work at the municipality of Heraklion with the psychiatric professor who is responsible for the mobile unit visiting various villages. So there was chance for early intervention in families that had children that were in need of early treatment, and also to save some people, adults, from relapses because they avoided taking their medication and they couldn't conform with the therapeutic scheme the way we should. So this was obvious when we heard about the post-traumatic stress conditions, because you pointed out that cooperation between the priest and the psychiatric nurse is of paramount importance. So we just wish to have this type of results coming out of cooperation. Now I will mention the members of the family that are in transition, adolescents. Adolescence is at the borders of the mental and physical, the external world and the internal, the individual and the family and cultural levels, and at the border of normal and pathological. It is a process of symbolization and subjectification. We see the deconstruction of the existing network of representations as written in the mentality of the child, and this network is replaced by another network, including the new conception of the self, the body, and the other, right from the physical changes, the physical coming of age, adolescents find themselves in front of a warring foreigner, that is their new biological body they cannot accept and invest in. So, because of this, we have a reconfiguration of the representations accompanied with feelings of unfamiliar, anxieties of annihilation, and the threat of the collapse of the self, because they cannot really be fully dilated with this new body, this new thing, this new identity. So the anxiety caused by the loss of the previous representations of self make young adults, adolescents turn inwardly in order to reconstruct these representations, and on the other hand they're trying to use some external objects as mirrors reflecting images, nice or ugly, to help him make up their own image. In some cases the image they see is confusing, and the result is that they cannot discern between the bad and the good, between truth and false, what is true, what is false. And sometimes there is no image because the parents cannot see the child itself, which brings the child to the vacuum of the non-existence. So we have failures in the symbolic function and reformulation of the self for a narcissistic stability, and on the other hand we have a narcissistic pathology having to do with behaviors and body, and this could lead to delinquency, anorexia, bulimia, drug abuse. So we see some ways coming from the cultural reality, and we have this type of acting out, that is to proceed to acts instead of discourse. So adolescence is in contact with the cultural reality. We therapists worry about the features of our culture that might affect the possibility of adolescents to become adults, because sometimes this could give rise to pathologies. We live in a world which is against thinking, which means that some parents are still in their own adolescence. They cannot convey what they should to the child. On the other hand, they try to lure the child with avoiding any type of prohibitions. We live in an era when adolescents and young adults stay defensive as to their introduction to the social reality. Is this a new latent reality, or is it just a pseudo maturation through these acting outs? Anyway, adolescents move from their previous self, and they're trying to identify with the other. But what's the other they have to meet? We have individualization. Of course, human beings want to become individual and want to have their particularities recognized. For some, this is inevitable, but for some others, this means destruction of social bonds, and we have this type of changes. Well, we mentioned the new forms of family before. So all these changes degrade what is collective for the benefit of what is individual, and there is a question about the rationality of things. So in such a world, it's very difficult to define the boundaries between natural, artificial, physical, acceptable. And adolescents are called upon to learn and reprogram themselves in a world which is not stable, and nothing is to be taken for granted. Models, references, norms change all the time. That is, the adolescent situations come up again and again, and they're interwoven with the other elements of social and cultural development. So I just wonder what is going to happen with adolescents in a rapidly changed world which is also internationalized or globalized. And now the question is, what are the social and cultural standards and criteria, and what are the changes in the near future that are going to become the frame for the configuration of the various types of adolescence? And what are the challenges or the issues that are going to become the limits, or they are going to give the incentive for our adolescents to change their hypostasis? The societies of the future, the societies of biotechnology and information, and the dynamic elements are production of scientific and technological knowledge and the completion of all processes leading to innovation. So the young have to live in a world that is very complicated and artificial, and we have this difference of scale between the individual and the system, which is becoming more and more. Now we have these discoveries, we have the illusions of the child, the creation of artificial or virtual realities, and the role of the internet in this sense is destructive. So adolescents stay in a stage of staying inert. They get stuck to what is magical, and at the same time they are faced with the tough reality. And quite often I hear from parents, and I'm quite impressed, that he's going to leave to England. Yes, but how? Because how is he able to do so? Because this child has never traveled in Athens, within Athens, in Attica. So we think that everything will change in the future, and also the workplace, professions, skills are being abolished or sometimes overestimated. And the specter of unemployment is a threat to all professions and trades. So the young try to adapt passively. They feel small and alone. And families are also in crisis, and the parents have their own adjustment anxieties, and they cannot contain the anxieties of their children. Anyway, parents today have lost their own value system, and they're also in search of magical solutions. Now, what finally prevails is avoidance of taking decisions and also violence. The social characteristics of our era define, through mediation, the psychological features of an extended adolescence, and this recycles the crisis of families, leading to explosions. The crisis in adolescence is not necessarily something pathological. It is a very complicated process from immaturity to maturity. Transition is not a linear one. The young ones are narcissistically vulnerable. We have this move of internalization because they have to take hold of their self in order to construct a new identity on the basis of identification. But identification with what? And what is there to differentiate oneself from? Now, the object of the one becomes very vulnerable, and it can no longer contain this person. And today's adolescents are actually feeling this lack. It's as if there is no state for them, nothing to meet outside, and nothing to connect with the self. We have the other, and the other situation established as a foreign locus in the mental apparatus. So these young people feel that there is no space and time for them to contain things important for them. Their mental capacity is a nest taken over by a mass of a self-object, since there is no process of independence and
εξωτερικής πραγματικότητας. Με αυτό το αυγό της θεογονίας μέσα του...
So, with this situation, young people have to face dilemmas in the type of everything or nothing. So this is a way of introducing reality, and we have regressions to the world of uncertainty, which becomes a threat. In such a world, life becomes empty, and there is no satisfaction coming from exploring the world, and there is no possibility to elaborate experience on the basis of fantasy. And we have this fluency in all fields, also dependence on the family, and we have this huge psychological pressure. This crisis that cannot be resolved takes on the form of coming back to oneself or trying to identify with the other, wandering about, leaving school, dropping out, suicidal attempts, risky behaviors, reckless driving, driving too fast, rapes, or even homicide, and of course dependence. So what is certain, I have to reiterate this, is that we have this suspension of thinking and mentalization. Without thinking and mentalization, it's unavoidable to proceed to acting out, and we have adolescents violent against themselves, suicides, drugs, or they even act out against the others, delinquency, abuse, rapes. What is less self-evident but very decisive is the elaboration by the subject with itself when we have this connection between social violence and possible individual violence. The self has to opt for specific directions in order to deal with things such as sexuality, work, rationality. And in our times, well, it seems, and we see it on a daily basis, these issues are approached through violence. So what we see in adolescence in modern societies is the lack of definition, the lack of changing. They are very vulnerable as regards political and technological developments. So this is, this willingness to change creates frustration for the parents who want to see their children actually do what they wanted to do back then when they were young, because they feel unfamiliar with these new cultural dimensions. In the societies of the past, roles were predefined, everything was certain and stable, but now we have loose family relations, no models, and there is ambiguity in the parents, which makes the young people depressive, and sometimes this might lead to destructive behaviors. So what are the new pathologies? These pathologies have to do with narcissistic vulnerability. It's not about new symptoms. We're talking about personality disorders based on dependence, lack of movement, and attachments. There is lack in the processes of thinking, of fantasy as well. Now the body becomes the main field of expression and search of individuality. We see tattoos, piercing, they cut themselves. We see body art, performance, cosmetic surgery, they use implants. So this is this turn towards the body. We see these fully tattooed bodies and piercing. This is an indication of something happening internally. We have these boundaries between the public and the individual that is covered. The boundaries are covered with the colors of the tattoos, or sometimes with the self-inflicted harm. And we have this effort to gain a new body. This has to do with masochism again and pain. The body wants to become separated from the other, mainly the mother. So I try to become familiar with my own body and my own ego. The body image was always a field promoting self. You know, Dali had this sculpture made this head of Aphrodite, where the ear is at the place of the nose, trying to go against the traditional forms of beauty. Well, this is an extreme. And Stellark, another performer, tried to do this in his own body. So we have these fantasies and the preconscious space that have to be further explored as regards the phenomenon. Alessandra Rema wrote a wonderful book entitled Under the Skin, and she writes that from her clinical experience with people that change their bodies, and this is an obsession for them, so there are three main fantasies in these cases. First, this fantasy of reclaiming, the reclaiming fantasy. Somehow they try to discard what was given to them by their parents, and therefore they discard this part of the body, and thus I discard my parents because this is a threat. And the second fantasy is the perfect match fantasy, which reflects the perfect idol. And when one feels insecure, they need to have the perfect match, the perfect idol. And of course, the self-made fantasy, which means that I decide for myself. So, through these systematic modifications, the body meets the gaze of the others, and we get a message. We see these painted bodies, and actually we are in this position of the voyeur, or the position of containment. If the other manages to keep the gaze on the body, trying to give signification to these acts, that is, acting out, that abolishes any type of boundaries, then maybe we have this containing function. So there is no point in going against our young, saying, no, don't wear this or that, no tattoos, because this will only exacerbate the situation. Adults or parents mainly have to say that we accept them as they are. So in this case, they will not really have to adopt this type of behaviors. Now, during adolescence, the body and its functions become present in a very violent way, and they try to attract the whole mental apparatus. And then we have the question, who owns the body? This has to do with taking distance from the mother. So young people that have to become adults first have to say goodbye to their mothers, to the Greek mothers who are overprotective. So they proceed to extreme acts. And also self-trauma. Again, there is dependency there, incomplete living. So every time they find it difficult to become independent, it's only then that we have this type of conflicts after separations. So when we ask them, why do you do this to yourself? They say, I don't know, but I feel relieved. So the pain of the body covers and offers relief to the mental pain. So in a few words, I would like to mention this new phenomenon. I'm not going to get into further details. It's what Mr. Anagnostopoulos mentioned. We are concerned now a lot because we have more and more people referred to us. We have this ambivalent sexuality. Young people keep both sexes because they cannot choose. So in globalized societies, we also have to mention the new populations coming to mental health professionals. Young adults immigrants coming to us because now their background is fully demolished. They have anxiety because of loss and any type of psychopathological symptoms with diffuse identities, stories buried in their subconscious with old and fresh traumas. So finally, in the past, coming of age was a ritual, and this was the way the adolescents became adults. So this was very clear cut, and this was commonly accepted by the community. There is no such a thing now. We don't have coming of age rituals. There are some trials, actually they have to sit for the exams or go to university or postgraduate studies. And again, the army, it's not there for everybody. Now, job market again and financial independence, this is not stable either. And rituals are fragmented, they are demystified, and they are not commonly accepted by all. So after the abolishment of clear-cut stages in development and rituals, whereas there is this internal lead, people try to find other ways of expression, so the individual and the families have to do so. But now they cannot substitute the common mythology, so they try to find another way out, projected to some separated parts, for example, getting a degree, for example, or sitting for the exams, for university entrance exams. It seems that the whole families live around this objective for 4 or 5 years. So if the myths trying to give collective identity are no longer there, we have this lack of orientation and identity. People are alone in their effort to find their identity. Myth has to offer identity and a way out of anonymity, and people trying to become famous or recognized by others. So we see this in the mass media. It seems as if now our people that are in adolescence try to find their own myths, and we adults create our own myths in defense. So maybe the personal myth takes on new dimensions and significance. So finally, I would like to stop by saying that since we talk about the family of the future, indeed the family of the past had values, rules, hierarchy, respect, fear, idealization, and continuity in family generations and in the family myth, if you like. And of course, not everybody had to follow this, but anyway, this was a stable basis. The family of today is a family in transition, and this is why there is diffused anxiety. How about the family of the future? The family of the future, in my mind, needs new connections and interconnections between the members. We need emotional discourse and common quest of meaning. We need faith and vision. We need memory and desires. Finally, I will finish with the words of Kazantzakis. I believe in a world that is not there, but by believing in this world, I create this world. What does not exist is what we haven't wished for enough. Thank you.